The wind howled over the frozen land, rolling in from the open sea like the breath of an unseen beast. The ice groaned as it shifted in the dark waters, and the sky was heavy with the weight of an approaching storm. In a small village nestled between the towering cliffs and the endless Arctic expanse, a young woman named Sedna sat by the fire, combing her long black hair. Her fingers, nimble and strong, moved through the thick strands, untangling knots that had formed during the long day. Sedna was known throughout the village for her beauty, but even more so for her unyielding spirit. She was unlike the other women, who gladly took husbands, bore children, and lived in the shadow of hunters. Sedna had no desire for marriage. She found the men of her village weak, boasting of their strength, but trembling before the storm. She saw through their empty promises of warmth and protection. Sedna, her father, Anguta, sighed as he sat across from her, sharpening his hunting knife. Many men have asked for your hand, yet you refuse them all. Why do you resist the path all women must walk? Sedna did not look up. Because I am not like the others. I will not wait by the fire for a man who may never return. Angus frowned, his weathered hands tightening around the handle of his knife. He was a respected hunter, known for his strength and wisdom, but Sedna was the one thing he could not control. The land is harsh, my daughter. A woman without a husband is like a boat without a paddle, drifting lost. Sedna smiled faintly, her dark eyes glinting like the sea at midnight. Then I will grow fins. The next evening, a stranger arrived in the village as the sky burned orange with the setting sun. He was tall, wrapped in the richest furs, his face hidden beneath the hood of his cloak. His voice was deep, smooth as the ice melting in spring. I have heard of the girl with hair as dark as the ocean's depths, he said, standing before Anguta's tent. I have come to make her my wife. Anguta eyed the stranger warily. And what do you offer in return? The stranger smiled. Wealth beyond measure. My land is rich with seals, my home warm with furs. Sedna will never know hunger or cold again. The villagers murmured among themselves. A strong hunter, a provider, surely this was a worthy husband. But Sedna, watching from the shadows, felt a chill run down her spine. There was something unnatural about the man, something that lurked behind his voice like a whisper in the wind. Still, the village had suffered a harsh winter, and her father, desperate to ensure her survival, decided for her. You will go with him, Anguta declared. Sedna's heart pounded like the waves against the ice. No, she whispered, but her father's hand was firm on her shoulder. The stranger extended his hand, and Sedna, with no other choice, took it. The stranger led her away from the village, guiding her across the frozen sea in a sleek black kayak. The water was eerily calm, reflecting the full moon like a sheet of glass. The land behind them faded into darkness, swallowed by the vastness of the Arctic night. For hours they paddled, the cold seeping into Sedna's bones. Where is your home? She asked, her voice barely carrying over the water. The stranger said nothing. Sedna's unease grew. His movements were too smooth, too controlled, as if he were not truly human. The silence pressed against her like the weight of the deep. Then, in the distance, she saw it, a small, desolate island, jagged and barren, rising from the sea like the ribs of some long-dead beast. No warm fires, no rich furs, no village at all. She turned to the stranger, her breath catching in her throat. His hood had slipped back, revealing not the face of a man, but the sharp, glistening beak of a raven. Sedna's blood turned to ice. You are no hunter, she whispered. The creature let out a low, guttural laugh, its black eyes gleaming in the moonlight. No, my bride, it croaked. I am something far older. The wind screamed around them, and the sea churned. The island of shadows awaited. The icy wind cut through Sedna's furs as the kayak scraped against the frozen shore of the desolate island. The Raven Man, his black eyes glistening, pulled her from the boat with a grip stronger than any human's. Sedna struggled, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Around her, the world was silent, no voices of hunters, no barking sled dogs, no crackling fires. Only the slow, rhythmic breathing of the tide. Back in her father's village, Sedna had known warmth. The Kaji, the communal house where the elders told stories of creation and the hunters shared their wisdom, had always been filled with laughter and the scent of burning seal oil. She could still recall the rhythm of her mother's hands weaving sinew thread into sturdy boots, the careful carving of bone into tools by her uncles, and the flickering light of soapstone lamps casting dancing shadows on the tent walls. Now, here on the island of shadows, there was no such comfort. The Raven Man dragged her to a small, crude hut made of dried fish skin stretched over whalebone. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of rotting meat. Strips of blubber hung from the ceiling, flies buzzing lazily around them. Instead of soft furs, the floor was covered in brittle feathers, sharp as needles against her skin. "You are mine now," the creature croaked, its beak clicking with satisfaction. Sedna clenched her fists. She had never been weak and had never let anyone decide her fate. She would not start now. "You are no hunter," she spat. "You are a liar, a thief. The spirits will punish you." The Raven Man only laughed, a dry, rustling sound like ice cracking beneath a sled. "The spirits do not listen here. No one will come for you, Sedna. You are alone." Days passed, though Sedna could no longer tell how many. Time moved strangely in this cursed place, the sun hanging low on the horizon, never fully rising nor setting. She was given little food, half-rotten fish, and stringy meat that tasted of decay. The Inuits of her village knew the ocean as both a giver and a taker, a force to be honored and respected. But here, it felt as though the sea had been twisted into something cruel, something starving. Back home, Sedna had spent her childhood watching the hunters prepare for the season, carving harpoons from narwhal tusks, testing their kayaks for leaks, and offering small pieces of food to the spirits before setting out. They would speak of Sila, the breath of the world, the force that controlled the weather, and Tornasuk, the great spirit that ruled the creatures of the deep. Before every hunt, the Angakuk, the village shaman, would perform a ritual, a burning dried moss, calling to the ancestors for guidance. Here, there was no Sila. No ancestors. Only her and the bird thing that had stolen her away. But Sedna was not without her strength. On the fourth day, or perhaps the fifth, she refused to eat. She pushed the rotten fish aside, her stomach aching with hunger but her mind sharper than ever. The Raven Man watched her with narrowed eyes. "You will die," he warned. "Then I will die free," Sedna whispered. That night, she dreamed of her father's village. She saw the hunters gathered around the fire, their faces hollow with worry. She saw her father, Anguta, staring out at the sea, his hands trembling. He had made a terrible mistake. And she saw something else, a kayak gliding through the waves, coming for her. Far across the ocean, in the village Sedna once called home, the people felt her absence like a missing limb. Without her, the air inside the Kaji was still, the lamps dimmer. The old women, who once scolded her for her stubbornness, now wept quietly into their furs. Anguta could not escape his guilt. Each night, as the wind whispered through the cracks of his tent, he heard her voice calling to him across the water. He saw her in his dreams, her hair tangled with salt, her eyes hollow but burning with fury. He could not ignore the spirits any longer. At dawn, he took his kayak and paddled out onto the open sea. The journey was long, the cold biting deep into his bones, but he followed the pull of his daughter's voice, the same way a hunter follows the scent of blood. On the night that Sedna saw the kayak in her dreams, a storm began to gather on the horizon. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of something familiar, smoke, seal fat burning on a fire. she stumbled out of the wretched hut, her heart pounding. The sea was restless, waves rolling in faster as if something beneath the water was waking up. And then, a shadow on the water. A kayak. Her father. "Father," she cried, running to the shore, the wind lashing against her skin. "I am here." The kayak glided closer, the figure inside growing clearer. Angus, his face lined with grief, reached out for her. "Come, my child. We must go home." For the first time in days, hope filled Sedna's chest. She waded into the water, the cold slicing through her bones, but she did not care. She reached for her father's hands. But as his fingers closed around hers, the Raven Man screeched from the shore. "She is mine." The wind roared, the sky darkened, and the sea began to rise. Waves crashed around them, and suddenly, Anguta felt fear, not for his daughter, but for himself. The ocean churned, its hunger awakened. If he did not leave now, he would be swallowed whole. And so, in his terror, he made a terrible decision. He pried Sedna's fingers from the kayak. "Father, no," she screamed, but Anguta struck her hands with his paddle, breaking her grip. One by one, her fingers slipped beneath the waves. As the cold swallowed Sedna, her body changed. The ocean, sensing her suffering, claimed her as its own. Her fingers, lost in the deep, became seals, their dark eyes wide and watchful. Her nails became walruses, their tusks gleaming like the bones of the drowned. And Sedna, she did not sink. She did not die. She became something else. The sea surged, and Anguta, watching in horror, realized his mistake too late. Beneath the waves, his daughter opened her eyes, black as the abyss, endless as the tide. The ocean had a new mistress. Sedna's body plunged into the freezing abyss, her father's betrayal still burning in her heart. The cold clawed at her skin, but she did not drown. The sea had taken her, claimed her, but it would not consume her. Instead, something inside her changed. The ocean surged, roaring with a voice older than time, and from the depths came transformation. Her severed fingers, drifting in the currents, did not disappear. They grew, their flesh reshaping, twisting, becoming something new. The bones of her hands stretched and curled into fins, the nails hardened into tusks. Her knuckles became seals, sleek and watchful. Her palms became walruses, their heavy forms sinking into the depths. And the last fragments of her, the tips of her fingers, lengthened into great whales, their mighty hearts thundering with her sorrow. Above, the storm unleashed its fury upon the world. The sky, once a vast and frozen expanse, split apart, and the wind screamed as if it had lost its soul. The water rose in jagged peaks, black waves crashing like mountains against the shore. Augusta, still in his kayak, turned to flee, but the ocean was no longer the same. It had Sedna's anger now. A monstrous wall of water rose behind him, reaching toward the heavens before collapsing upon his fragile vessel. He did not even have time to cry out. The sea swallowed him whole. But Sedna did not die. She sank deeper and deeper, past the ice-choked surface, past the hunting grounds of seals, past the shadows where only whales dared to go. The ocean had no end, and neither did she. The deeper she fell, the more she became part of it, her hair stretching like kelp, her arms becoming waves, her breath merging with the tide. She was no longer merely Sedna, the girl betrayed. She was now Sedna, the goddess of the deep. In the village, the storm raged for 3 days and 3 nights. The hunters could not go to sea. The women could not gather driftwood. The children huddled in their tents, listening to the wind wail like a grieving mother. The elders whispered among themselves. This was no ordinary storm. This was punishment. Sedna was no longer among them, but she was not gone. The ocean was her now. and she was angry. With no choice left, they turned to the Angakok, the shaman. He was an old man, his face lined like cracked ice, his hands as weathered as whalebone. He alone could speak with spirits and could enter the shadowed world where the gods whispered their secrets. "You must go to her," the elders begged. "You must calm her, or we will all starve." The Angakok nodded solemnly. He gathered his tools, the drum carved from walrus hide, the stones marked with the signs of the ancestors, and a small tooth from a great white bear, a talisman of protection. He sat before the fire, crossed his legs, and began to chant. His voice was low at first, like the murmur of the tide, but soon it rose, echoing the howl of the wind. He struck the drum once, twice, then again, until its rhythm matched the crashing of the waves. His breath came in gasps, his body swayed, and then darkness. When the Angakok opened his eyes, he was no longer in the village. He stood on the edge of the world, where the land ended and the sea began. The sky was black, the stars were missing. Beneath him, the ocean pulsed, a living thing, restless, waiting. Then, from the depths, she rose. Sedna was no longer the girl he had once known. Her hair was the sea, twisting and curling like the waves in a storm. Her eyes were bottomless, darker than the places where even fish feared to go. Her hands, once soft, had become clawed things, long and sharp, shaped by sorrow. The Angakok did not kneel. He did not look away. He had come to bargain. "O Great One," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his bones. "The people suffer. The fish have vanished, and the seals will not come. The sea rages, and we do not know how to calm it." Sedna's gaze did not waver. When she spoke, her voice was the tide itself, crashing and endless. "You did not listen before," she said. "You let them take me. You let him betray me. And now you come only because you hunger?" The Angakok closed his eyes. "We have wronged you, Sedna. We did not see. We did not protect you. We cannot undo what has been done." He hesitated, then stepped forward. "But I can honor you now?" Sedna watched him in silence. Then, he knelt, and from his belt, he took a bone comb. Gently, with hands that had once hunted but now only sought to heal, he reached for her tangled, seaweed-thick hair. He combed. With each stroke, the storm weakened. The waves calmed. The wind softened. The sea, which had howled for vengeance, sighed instead. When he finished, Sedna closed her eyes. The water around her stilled. "You will leave this place," she whispered. "And you will tell them. You will tell them that I am here. That I am watching." The Angakok nodded. He had done what he came to do. The vision faded. The ocean receded. And when he opened his eyes, he was once again in the village, the fire flickering before him. The storm was gone. From that day on, the people never forgot Sedna. The hunters, before setting out, would offer her gifts, a strand of hair, a carved bone, a whispered prayer. The Angakok would journey into the spirit world to comb her hair, ensuring that the fish and seals would return. But they also knew this. She was no longer Sedna the girl. She was Sedna the ruler of the deep, the one who held all life in her grasp. She had been betrayed once. She would never be betrayed again. The storm had passed, and the sea had calmed, but the world was forever changed. The village, once filled with the voices of hunters and the laughter of children, now carried a different sound, the whisper of the ocean, always present, always watching. The elders gathered in the Kaji, the great communal house, their faces shadowed by flickering lamplight. The Angakok, still weary from his journey into the spirit world, sat before them. He had returned, but he was no longer the same man who had left. "She is there," he murmured, his voice like the wind over the tundra. She is waiting. She will always be waiting. The villagers listened in silence. They knew now what they had done. The sea had taken Sedna, but not as a corpse to be forgotten. She had become something greater, something eternal. She was now the mistress of the deep, the guardian of all creatures that swam beneath the waves. And she would never forgive betrayal again. From that day forward, the people honored Sedna. The Angakok took it upon himself to calm her spirit, for they all knew what would happen if she grew angry once more. When the fish and seals became scarce, when the storms returned, when the ice cracked too soon, it was said that Sedna was displeased. To appease her, the Angakok would enter a trance, journeying into the spirit world. There, he would find her, seated beneath the endless dark waters, her hair tangled with seaweed, her eyes as vast as the ocean itself. And he would comb her hair. Stroke by stroke, he would untangle it, whispering words of reverence and sorrow, soothing her wrath. Only then would the seals return, the fish fill the nets, and the ice become steady once more. The hunters, before venturing onto the frozen sea, left offerings for her, small carved figures of whales, a lock of hair, even drops of their own blood. It was their way of seeking her blessing, of showing that they had not forgotten. But the people knew, Sedna's gifts were not given freely. If a hunter took too much, if he killed without thanks, if he disrespected the ocean, Sedna would remember. And the sea would turn against him. Generations passed, and the legend of Sedna endured. Fathers told their sons of the girl who became a goddess. Mothers warned their daughters never to trust a man too easily. The hunters, no matter how skilled, no matter how proud, always spoke her name with reverence. But some forgot. One season, when the hunt was poor and hunger spread through the village, a young hunter named Taktu ignored the warnings of the elders. He did not leave offerings, did not whisper prayers. He saw the ocean as nothing more than a thing to be conquered, a mere provider of flesh and bone. And so he went out onto the ice, armed with his harpoon, his heart filled with arrogance. He did not return. The next morning, his kayak was found shattered, its wood splintered against the shore. Nobody. No sign of a struggle. Only the vast, endless ocean, as still as glass, reflected the sky with cruel indifference. The people knew what had happened. Sedna had taken him. Even today, among the Inuit peoples of Greenland, Canada, and Alaska, the story of Sedna is still told. She is not just a goddess of legend, she is real as the sea, as real as the creatures that swim beneath it. Some believe that Sedna's story is a warning, a reminder that the ocean is not something to be controlled, but respected. That nature is not a resource to be exploited, but a force to be honored. Others see in Sedna a reflection of all women who have been wronged, who have been betrayed, who have been cast aside by those who should have protected them. She is a symbol of anger, sorrow, and transformation. And for those who still live by the ocean, who still take their living from the sea, Sedna remains a presence. The hunters still leave offerings. The shamans still speak her name. The ocean still whispers her story. For Sedna never forgets. And she never forgives.